All right, good afternoon. We will go ahead and call the June 28th meeting of the Policy Committee to order. Ms. Kushner, Chair of the Policy Committee, is running late. She will be joining us shortly, so when she arrives, I'll turn the chair back over to her. But we'll go, for time's sake, we'll go ahead and get started. Before we do anything, I'd like to go ahead and deputize other members of the board to be members of the Policy Committee for today. A bit of a formality, but we'll do it anyway, since Chris and I are the only two formal members. So,
do we need a motion?
No, we just deputize. So
all right.
You are deputized. So now that the full group is a member of the committee for today, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the May meeting of the Policy Committee.
Having reviewed the minutes of the May policy meeting, I move their adoption.
A second.
We have motion to second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. Present with us in the boardroom are Ms. Karen Carter, Ms. Roxy Cash, Vice Chair Chris Haggerty, Ms. Heather Scott, and our lawyer, legal counsel, Mr. Jonathan Blumberg, and online, Ms. Tara Waters is joining us. And Tara, I will try to keep an eye out for your hand, but if necessary, please speak up. All right, we've got a number of policies to address, some being more formalities, some more substantive discussion. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Although before we get started, we do want to acknowledge your last policy committee meeting, Lloyd. Lloyd Gardner, Dr. Lloyd Gardner has been a longtime member, contributor, advocate, passionate supporter of this school system. 36 years, right, Lloyd? Your mark has been left, and it's a mark that we respect and want to honor and continue. Thank you for all of your work, and we're so glad that you have worked with us on policy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right. So the first policy before us is addressing board conflict of interest. Policy 2121.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Thank you, members of the board, for being here this afternoon for our last policy committee of the school year and for my last one. And since I have the first one to present, I will, if I may, take privilege to just thank you for your leadership and support over the years. It has been indeed been a pleasure and an honor to work with you in this capacity, in many different capacities, in many different roles. But I always appreciate when we come together for this particular committee work, for the vision you have, the dedication you take, the scrutiny you exercise, and making sure that our policies do provide the framework and the foundation to support our schools, students, and staff. I always admire, learn from, and grow from the questions you present because of the insights and viewpoints you want to express, as well as making sure we get it right for our students in schools. And I appreciate that dedication that comes from the core of each one of you. And it's just been a privilege to work with you. I thank you for what you give to our district and your leadership and your support, and wish you the very best as you continue. I no doubt love this district, and I know you do as well, as evidenced by your work. And it's just been a great partnership. So thank you for that. So we'll look at our first policy, board member conflict of interest, policy 2131. It really is just some revisions that we're making as a response to updates that the School Boards Association has made. There are several points in the policy. The preamble to it stays the same. You will notice that the first revision is noted in red with number 1 underneath the second paragraph. And if I may, I'll read through it to show you the changes that we're adding. A board member will not solicit or receive personal financial gain from the school system by means of intimidation, undue influence, or misuse of school system employees in violation of General Statute 14-234.2. I'll see if anybody has any questions on that particular proposed revision.
Makes complete sense, I believe.
That statute went into effect January 2022, so it's very new, and it's just implementing new legislative change.
Thank you, Mr. Blumberg, for that extended thought.
Both of these.
Okay.
Yeah, the one that I just read went into effect January 1st, 2022.
The contract.
So with that addition, to reflect that change in January, it changed our numbering system, as you will note, and we have renumbered. In number 2, we have got a strike through state law that precedes the reference to General Statute 14-234. Moving forward, our next particular proposed revision to this policy you will see noted in number 3. A board member who is also a director, officer, or governing board member of a nonprofit will not, 1, knowingly vote on, participate in deliberations on, or administer any contract with that nonprofit. 2, influence or attempt to influence the deliberation of vote of others on any such contract. Or 3, solicit or receive any gift, reward, or other benefit in exchange for recommending, influencing, or attempting to influence the award of such contract in violation of General Statute 14-234.3. Once the board member's recusal is recorded in the minutes of the board may enter into or administer the contract. Are there any questions about that particular revision that we may answer for you?
Ms. Scott?
The only thing that is the only part of this that's a little confusing is to me. I mean, I think after I read through, I think I figure it out, but is knowing which board is being referred to. Like once the board members, in the last sentence, that I assume that means once the school board members' recusal is recorded in the minutes of the board. But I wonder, since we're talking about different boards, you know, a school board being a member of a board of a nonprofit, if that's necessary to add, just to clarify.
So that's an interesting point, Ms. Scott. We typically, when we're talking about us, capitalize board. And so if we would capitalize board when we're talking about a Board of Education member, and when you're talking about a governing board of another not-for-profit, then it wouldn't be capitalized because it wouldn't quite be.
So in number 3, all of the board members, when referring to the school board, just for
Or
continuity.
even like in 4, board is capitalized for board
Right.
member.
Yeah.
And that tends to be a little bit more of a standard. So whenever referring to a Board of Education member, it should be capitalized. If we're talking about a generic governing board, then it would not be the personal noun. Is that right?
Yeah.
We are
That's
the wrong
grammar.
person.
Proper noun, there we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
But-
do think that is a good recommendation, especially in light of what we've been trying to do in other policies to capitalize the B in board. Since this was a transfer over from the State Boards Association, we did not catch that. But that might do dual purposes, to be consistent as well as to address your concern, Ms. Scott, if you feel like it satisfactorily does.
Yes, I think that would clarify to one reading this which board is being referred to. And
We will make that change then, and with initial caps of the word board throughout that particular paragraph.
Well, except when you're talking
Except-
about, right, the governing board of a non-for-profit.
Yes.
That
yes,
stays
yes,
lowercase.
Yes, thank you, yes.
But Dr. Crane's got that.
Yeah.
Grammar.
I already had it marked.
All right, very good. Mr. Haggerty.
Just a quick question. I don't know, Dr. Crane, if this would be a question for you or for council. The statute that creates the new requirement for recusal, when it identifies a nonprofit, it does create some exceptions. And I don't know if those are exceptions we need in our policy or if we just want to use the blanket nonprofit. I don't know if that was a yes or a no.
It's always good to have sound
I
effects.
feel like it was a game show.
We're
Maybe
pulling
I
out
got
all the
wrong.
stops. We're pulling out all the stops today.
Yes, the first statute, it does say for the purpose of 14-234.3, a nonprofit is a nonprofit corporation, organization, or association, incorporated or otherwise, that is organized or operating in the state primarily for religious, charitable, scientific, literary, public health and safety, or educational purposes, excluding any board, entity, or other organization created by the state or by any political subdivision of the state.
And that's just what I was thinking about. Sometimes we might be affiliated with a local organization that maybe was set up by the county, or, could be something that was set up in part by the district. And I just didn't know how far we wanted to take that.
Mr. Blumberg, how do you feel about including that language?
I mean, it's, both of the feedback from the board members on both those points are really excellent. To clarify which board you're talking about, I think is excellent. And I think it makes sense to go ahead and put the definition in. I mean,
I'll do that.
You all are not wordy on these policies. You try to get them right on point, but I think it's an excellent suggestion to go ahead and define what a nonprofit is, because it can mean lots of different things depending on what statute you're looking at. So I think it makes sense to add that in.
We will, if it's the will of the board, recommendation, we'll make that addition.
Could I just go back to the prior one? Are you all satisfied at this point that the prohibitions that are outlined are prohibitions in your role as a school board member, the way it's written? So for example, it wouldn't, if you're the head of a nonprofit and you're a school board member, that obviously you can't knowingly vote on, participate in, deliberate, or administer the contract on behalf of the school board. But if you're with a nonprofit, there's nothing to keep you from being involved in that contract. That's the intent of it. If you're at peace that that's what it means and you know what it means, then that's good. But I think it's a great question that came up, and I just want to make sure that you all have clarity on that.
Well, and isn't the intent of this to, if in gray area, disclose, right? A conflict of interest doesn't mean a conflict of interest can't be managed.
Right.
It just means it needs to be disclosed.
Right.
So if there is some contract and there's question about administration, then normally one would identify and then set up a strategy to manage that conflict rather than saying, oh, we can't do it. That's my understanding of conflict of interest. Is that
On
correct?
this one, there are certain times where the board simply couldn't enter
no,
into, right,
yes.
but this is with a nonprofit, so. Okay, as long as the capitalization gets it done, then if you're at peace, I'm at peace, but I just wanted to come back to it to make sure that there's clarity on it. That your prohibitions are around your role as a school board member, getting involved in deliberating on, voting on, administering that contract, having a role in it when you're also involved with a nonprofit. And so,
All right, so then just for clarity, we'll just run through the scenario.
Yeah.
You could be a member of a board member on a local boys club or girls club, or a scouting association, or the Post Center, and they could still come in and make recommendations and talk to us. It wouldn't preclude you from that conversation. It wouldn't preclude you from voting on the general school budget if there was something that even benefited those programs. It would only be when there's a contract with that specific organization that you would have to identify and recuse yourself. Is that right?
it's
or are there
with that
more
organization,
nuanced?
and that you'd need to be very clear what hat you're wearing. Like, hey, I mean, I'm involved with, you still can't try to engage the school board in, hey, now I'm reaching out as the nonprofit, and you can't engage it. But if you are working with that nonprofit and you're an officer and a director in some way, nothing would preclude you, once it's been approved, of continuing to work with a nonprofit on that. So I just, I think it was a great question, and I think if the capitalization brings the sufficient clarity, and this conversation does, then I'm fine and I'm at peace. But
Well, just for clarification, I don't know if we need more clarification, but let's take the role-playing scenario, right? The administer any contract, I'm assuming that is from the school's perspective. So let's take the scenario, Mr. Haggerty, you run a nonprofit. If the school system contracted with you for some Parks and Rec activity, my understanding of this reading is you could not administer it from the school system side, but you would not be precluded, since you run a lot of your nonprofit, you wouldn't be precluded from administrating that from that nonprofit side. Is that correct? It's from the school side that you can't administer.
that's my understanding.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, I'm at peace with the language, but I thought it was a really good clarification.
Ms. Kushner, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. And
And I'm also ready
I
to-
apologize for being late. It was out of my control, but here I am. And I thank you for allowing me to get a deep breath. And,
Yep.
thank you, Dr. Martin, for getting us started so we start on time. Hello to all of you. My main question was whether we landed as to whether, to Mr. Blumberg's suggestion, we needed to have some definitions in there. All right, Dr. Crane, you're going to put some definitions, and that was my main question. I think it's useful, and I think it's, as Dr. Martin says, to acknowledge and be transparent about our roles, both on this board and on any other boards we might serve on. I think it also has come up in the past with working with other school districts and how a board member cannot have any contact or determine any employment or a contract with the Wake County Public School System, but they are able to work with other LEAs. Is that also, Mr. Blumberg, that's my understanding. So if you're, we've had past board members who worked for DPI, and they were involved in working with other, we're not a LEA anymore. What are we, a public school unit? A PSU, anyhow, other public school systems across the state, as long as it's not Wake County. Is that, do we need to put that in this policy, or is that somewhere else?
I think we're going to go ahead and put the whole definition of a nonprofit in, so, which is right out of the statute, which I'm looking
Okay.
at. And I
Thank
think
you.
that's.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Martin, for passing the baton. And Dr. Crane, you've got the feedback you need to
I do.
clarify.
And just as a final note, we did revise the legal references at the end of the policy to note these new statutes.
All right. Ms. Waters, other board members? I see Ms. Waters is virtual, so hello, Ms. Waters. Any other questions?
I'll make a motion that we move the policy as revised to the board for its first reading.
All right, thank you, Dr. Martin. Is there a second? Looking at you, Mr. Harity. There's a motion and a second to move this forward to the full board for action. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Crane, Dr. Garner. So now Ms. Pulliam is here to discuss two proposed revisions, 4100 and 4150. Admission to the Wake County Public School System, and 4150 school assignment and transfers. Thank you for being here, Ms. Pulliam. It's good to see you, and you're going to be presenting both of these to the board. Mr. Carrozza is out and about, I think. So thank you, Susan, for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And Glenn says hi from the beach.
Before
Well-deserved vacation. And he hasn't even responded to a text today.
Good.
I'm so very proud.
That's important for long-term
Yes.
sanity, so thank you.
We've grouped these. We've grouped these two policies together, policy 4100 and 4150. There is an error in Assembly. One of the attachments for 4150 is not the correct version. We inadvertently attached 4100 there. So we've provided a printed copy at your place, as well as emailed that to you if you'd rather look at it on your screen. So when Susan gets to 4150, you'll need to refer to that.
And we will get it loaded into Assembly as soon as we can.
Thank you both. All right, Ms.
Well,
Pulliam,
good
thank you.
afternoon. So starting with policy 4100, admission to the Wake County Public School System, the majority of the recommended revisions are related to state board policy changes. In addition, we do have some language changes that we think would help clarify things for some of our parents, as we certainly use these policies on a regular basis in our office. So to start with, at the very beginning in the opening paragraph, the first edit that's recommended is to just make a technical correction. It previously referred to policy 4110. It should be referencing 4150. Okay. In Section A, there has been some confusion as of late in terms of where to start enrollment for our families that maybe were in a private or non-public kindergarten program. And so this just clarifies that language while keeping our current language related to preschool. So we've basically said to enroll in a preschool program, the child must meet the age and other eligibility requirements for the program in which the parent is seeking to enroll the child. There's no change there. The only change is that it's at the beginning of the paragraph. The new sentence then is that for enrollments other than the preschool program, the initial point of entry into the school system shall be at the kindergarten level.
Right, any questions about that language? All right, next up.
The remainder of Section A remains as is. Going into Section B, Item 4, you will see another technical correction. It previously referenced Policy 4100, Section E, and it should be 4100F, which will make sense as we get there and you see the numbering and sequencing changes. When we get to sections, oh, yes,
So
sir.
I'll just note, it starts in B and is sort of throughout. We've worked pretty consistently to change the language of homeless to students experiencing homelessness. It at least starts in B, right, for a student who's in foster care or considered homeless. I think we would rather, instead of considered homeless, it'd be for a student experiencing homelessness. This comes up multiple times. My recommendation is just to Control F, find every place where we've got homeless and put it in the context that we've been revising everything else.
Certainly, we can do that very easily.
And there's one, no, in my next sentence, C. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I appreciate that people first language.
Are we clear to move to Section C? Okay. In Section C, you'll start to see throughout both policies, we've made an effort to take out any specific gender references and neutralize the language to either a the or nothing if it's appropriate to make the sentence make sense. The remainder of Section C remains unchanged, barring any references to homelessness.
And so the one other piece that I saw, and this is a grammatical thing, is in 3A. For the purposes of this policy, visitation rights, it says will not be considered. It strikes me that will not be implies something in the future, and just, I think that grammatically we want to just say visitation rights are not considered a form of physical custody.
I'll defer
But I
to
will
Mr.
defer
Bloomberg
to
on that
our
one.
grammar expert.
And that's fine with me as well.
So the correction is for purposes of this policy, quote, visitation, end quote, rights are not to be considered a form of physical custody?
So I don't know if it's
Or
to
will
be.
not
I almost thought that it was a declarative statement that they are not. So I don't think you need to be. I think
Are not
you just
considered?
need that visitation
Okay.
rights are not considered a form
Okay.
of physical custody.
I was editing as I read, and I'm
Yeah,
glad you caught that.
I think. But that's why we flag and leave it to Dr. Crane to
Yes.
make sure we get the grammar right.
Any other items for discussion in Section C? Moving into Section D, Item 4, just highlighting those are not corrections or revisions. Those are just hyperlinks that exist within this policy that are remaining. Item 6 is new, and that does align with state board policy and recent legislation, and so that reads as provided.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on the military families.
Issue, and that's that, thank you. That there's the military compact where states get involved, in about 38 states are involved in this military compact to make it easier on military families for the students to be able to attend school. So a number of the provisions in here are designed to implement that. This is one of them.
Continuing forward, you'll see that changes the numbering and sequencing from this point forward in this section of the policy. So the next revisions you see are mostly number adjustments. 6 will become 7, 7 will become 8. In Section 8, subsection A, Part 7, you will see that there's more language here that is aligned with that military compact that needed to be revised to match that language.
Yeah, so in new section 7, old section 6, could there be an explanation of the dates? I read, and maybe I was just late at night reading it, but I was trying to understand, right, any student considered a child with a disability under the IDA who was enrolled in the school system for the last day of 2006-7, he goes on, they have to still live in Wake County. So if they live in Wake County, they have services in the Wake County schools. I think the only thing that I could think about a date here was if it was past 21 years old or something, and that, so the dates don't make sense to that. So I was just trying to wrap my head around the why, and there may be something obvious I missed, but
Candidly, this predates me as well, my first turnaround.
It concerns me that as soon as we started talking about dates and something that was old, that you looked right to me, but it's like, oh, this goes way back, and everybody looked at me.
I
was
meant
like,
you
oh,
might
great.
have the historical knowledge.
Yeah, so can you hone me in on that provision, with the number? It's. Yeah, okay.
It's section D, previously item 6, now number 7.
number 7.
Okay. Yes. So any student who is considered a child with a disability in the division and it was enrolled in the school on the last enrollment. 10 days, so long student. Yep. So there was a time period during which residency alone allowed for the right to attend school if you were a special needs child. And so this is that. Any student who's considered, this is an exception to the domicile requirement. And if the student, was considered a child with a disability, was enrolled in the district as of that date, or enrolled or attending on that date for that year, so long as the student still lives in Wake County and has been continuously enrolled in the system since that time. It's a grandparenting provision for what the law was at a period of time, which was residency alone allowed a special needs child the right to attend school. That's been changed, and so now a special needs child also needs to have domicile unless they're grandparented in under this provision. At some point, the math will work out that it doesn't make sense to put it in here any longer. But for now, I suppose it's still possible that a child starting in kindergarten at that date, couldn't they still be potentially in the district?
Yes, I think they
Yes.
have at least
This is
2
15,
years to
yeah.
go.
Okay, so this is parsing the difference between residency and domicile.
Exactly. These
So
are.
should we be clear on that language?
I
Or
don't.
is there a way to be clear on that language? Because
This is an.
like I'm a policy junkie, and I couldn't figure out where it was. So should we just use the language of residency versus domicile?
No, because this is all under D. The following categories of a student shall be admitted regardless of domiciliary status and without payment of tuition. So this is all under, each one of these are an exception to the domicile rule.
Okay.
So that, but I mean, if the board believes further clarity is necessary, I know we've gotten a little far away from the heading, but these are all exceptions to domicile. So
I can accept it. It's probably a provision that almost nobody will understand,
But I think
but it may need to be there.
Ms. Pulliam and her staff will need to refer to it,
Yeah.
this section time and again.
Yeah.
So we need to be clear and I think
No.
simple.
I was glad I had that historical
Yeah,
knowledge.
see, that's why we looked
As
to
the
you,
board's
sir.
attorney,
Lloyd, I'm joining you, buddy.
That's why we looked at.
I know, I was
appreciate
waiting
that.
for the glances to come here, but I'm so glad they were directed that way.
thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion through item, well, actually, really section D, part A? Okay. So we reviewed item 7 under, section D, item 7, subsection A, item 7 was the last one that we reviewed prior to going back. Again, it aligned with the military compact that Mr. Blumberg referenced. Coming back out to the left margin, we're moving on to item 9 and section D. Again, another policy reference that needed to be corrected. It was referencing policy 4110, and it should be referencing policy 4150. Section E, in almost all of its entirety, is a new section, again, related to the military compact that allows for our families that are impacted by these particular provisions to be able to enroll remotely while preparing for their pending move to the district. Because of the insertion of Section E, that then changes the sequencing that follows, so you'll see various edits there to
And I'm
capture that.
assuming Section E just mirrors the language of the military compact
Yes.
that we have agreed to as a state.
That's been approved by the state board
Okay.
policy as well. Yeah. Since that is a substantive section, I'll pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions.
Any questions about that language around military families? All right, thank you.
Moving through section F, you'll notice in item 3 that carries forward to another page, we have another policy reference correction, technical correction. Then we have sequencing adjustments. Previously F becomes G, previously G becomes H.
So Section J is new and is
Correct.
specific to Wake County.
Yes.
And it's something that has come up with discussions of when students.
Is this what we like?
So
Because we talk domicile all the time.
Yeah, so that when.
to explain perspective from staff,
Thank
it's
you.
simply that we do have families that move quite regularly. It's natural. It's a wonderful thing for most families, but we need to make sure that they understand it's their responsibility to let us know when that has happened so that we can help them with their school assignment, because domicile is how we assign students in our district. It also does give staff the ability to work with those families as they're working to provide that new updated information, and it does not change any of our practices with respect to if they move within the school year, within the district, they can remain without transportation to the end of the year, or they can choose to go to the school for the new address.
And this language does reflect current practice.
Correct.
I think it's helpful for us
Correct.
to be.
It doesn't change any of our practices that we're doing today. It just gives staff a little bit of codification to support when we do have to reach out to families that are being slow to tell us that they've
Yes,
missed.
and there's a lot of complexity in the world, for sure. Ms. Cash?
The 30 days starts, if a student no longer has the right to be enrolled in school, there's a grace period of 30 days. Is that from the time they let us know, the time you find out, the time they moved?
So the intent is that we're giving the family 30 days from the time of the move to let us know. However, you'll notice that the following sentence says unless a student has been granted discretionary admission or the grace period has been extended for good cause at the discretion of the Office of Student Assignment. So it does give us the flexibility to work with families if they're working with us, but it also does give us support if we do need to make changes based on changes in address.
Haggerty. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Cash, did you have additional questions?
No,
Ms.
I have a
Cash?
question about something else, but not this. We'll
Okay.
get through here.
Mr. Haggerty.
So this is a section I want to talk about as it relates to this one and 4150. So, all of us that have worked with transfer appeals have seen the horror stories of someone who's moved out of the district even over a year prior, but are still claiming residency in Wake County schools for some reason to stay in a desirable school. And I understand the staff's requesting the policy here, but when you are talking about potentially reassigning somebody, withdrawing them from the school, we do have a population that is very mobile. And, I wonder, as a matter of policy, if we shouldn't have some guarantee or some sort of notice effort. It could, we say that families must notify the principal of this, and it will be in the policy manual. But if we have found out that someone has moved or there's been a potential suspicion of move, I know it might be practice, but should we have something in policy to officially reach out and give them notice that if you have moved out of this area, you will be reassigned, and try to validate that. I just worry about people I worry about non-compliance through not knowing, not.
Certainly. It may not be clear in the language, and perhaps we need to look at it, but the intent of the policy is so that when we reach out to the family, either via email or through certified letter, that we would say these things to them. It's come to our attention that you may have moved. Please give us your new address so that we can help you with school assignment purposes. Please know if we don't hear back from you within 30 days, we may need to either withdraw your student or assign them to the school for the new address that we're aware of. So it's meant to be a language to put in those communication tools. So if that is not clear in the way that the policy is written, or if that's something that belongs in RMP, we're certainly happy to make sure that that's clear to families.
And before we start sounding too draconian, I think the practice also is that students remain in their school for the school year in most cases, and that we do want stability for our students in their school year and grades, and to finish off a grade. I think that needs to be stated and clear, because I think we recognize that's important.
And I
want us
think
to
you'll see
sound-
that the language is written a little bit differently in this policy because it's addressing enrollment
Right.
versus school assignment, which will be
Yeah.
addressed. The language is a little bit different in 4150 to address, I'm already attending school and I'm had a change of address, and here's the things I need to go through to make sure that the district's aware that I've moved. This is more, you've been admitted under a particular address, and that may, let's say I'm pre-registering now and I haven't started attending school and I've moved. You need to let us know. And so this is really more about just general enrollment versus, to your point, I've already been assigned to a school, I'm going to a school. Those rules, the language in that policy is a little bit different to address the idea that that's dealing with a student that's in a classroom setting already.
And that they still would have options for discretionary enrollment or a transfer, and that barring a school being capped, I think that
There's some language in there
you
to that
all, I
extent
think,
as well.
and I think your staff works very hard with
Yes.
families. I think that needs to be acknowledged and
Thank
said,
you.
how difficult these decisions are, but that the student enrollment staff does work really hard with families to make sure that we put students first.
But to Mr. Haggerty's point, I think you were looking for, we don't want surprise.
Right.
Yes, it's just
And so
transparency
I
on both
wonder-
ends.
And hearing Ms. Pulliam's discussion, which I know is how we operate, wouldn't we communicate both if we said a student who has been notified of lost eligibility will be withdrawn at the conclusion of the 30 days? Because as it stands, right, it could be that we found out that you lost eligibility. Is the 30 days based on when you moved or when we contacted you? And I think what I heard from Ms. Pulliam is we really need, once we've notified you, we're willing to work with you in 30 days. So I just wonder, simply asserting a student who has been notified of lost eligibility, I think might address?
I think so. I mean, I'm just curious what everyone thinks in terms of discussion, because there's pros and cons either way. If someone has intentionally been outside of the district and been trying to game the system for months, right, then you're giving them extra time above and beyond the time they've already spent in the school, and that might not seem right. But at the same time, we might have had people that, with remote learning or something else, did relocate to someplace out of the district, thinking everything was just fine, didn't know they were violating policy, and then could, get kicked out of their seat, lose their enrollment. And if they had known, or if they had, if they had an option of returning, they might have taken action differently. I just worry about families not understanding this, and if they don't understand it, making really bad choices with really bad consequences. So I was just looking.
Well, I think the stability of the student is what we want. So, I think the 30 days need to give them as much opportunity to make decisions. So it should be from the time they get notified, not any sooner than that. I don't know how we notify them. What if they've moved? How do we get a hold of them?
Right.
Therein lies some of the challenges. So I think the intent in talking with our attorneys as well was that we need to set a standard that parents within 30 days you need to let the school district know. That's just a standard. In addition to that, when we're working with you, we do have the ability to extend a grace period. However, if you're not working with us, Worst case scenario, at the end of the 30 days, I may have to withdraw your child from the school district because I can't confirm that they're eligible to attend, barring any other investigations that we would naturally do with our McKinney-Vento staff and so forth. So it's intended to help us share that there are consequences to some choices, particularly when it relates to domicile, and that we want to work with you, we want to help you, we want to keep your child in our schools if it's legally right to do. But if it's not, then we've got to have some end date to this. Otherwise, to your point, they could be gone for months and months and months and still be accessing our school district when they haven't done the right things and to get there the right way.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to make sure.
I see Ms. Carter's hand as well, so.
So just in terms of practice, I mean, if my concern is just about notice and making sure that parents know the rule before they worry about, before they potentially violate it. Are there things that you do in practice that could be formalized in rules of procedures or in policy about just even statement of the policy or statement of this rule at the beginning of each school year? So it's not something they get when they first enroll in the system and then 13 years later, something happens. Just so that we could guarantee that they have the notice and we can say with confidence that you knew about this before we hold you to these consequences.
I see Ms. Carter nodding. Was that what your point you wanted to make? I think that's, well, and every year we do send out enrollments letters for the next year. And that's another time that we can, I think, having it at the beginning of the year as a reminder, as well as when we do the enrollment for the next year. I think that's a good time to do it, because I think I think this policy needed that clarification so that we're being clear and on our rules, and we expect our families to be clear about their students and where they are with assignment, so with enrollment.
Does the enrollment letter make it very clear to them that when they get that letter, that they know that if this is not your current address and you're no longer in this area, you must notify us?
It's not in policy yet, so that's why we want it, so we can put it on there.
They will.
So you made the point that I was going to make.
Okay.
There are several documents for enrollment, for student assignment strips, things like that we can certainly put this language on, while also making sure it's clearly in our student assignment section of the website. So we do send out those assignment strips each year, and because it's not in policy, we don't have the ability to put that there, but we could now if it gets approved.
I think hearing this discussion gives Susan the opportunity to work with the team to identify the documents that do go out, and I think it would be best if it could be on multiple documents that go out just for reinforcement. So Susan will take a look in the processes that they put, to your point, Mr. Haggerty, as far as formalizing this on some type of the communications that they send out, whether it be assignment strip, the enrollment letter, et cetera, and probably all of them.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Cash.
So with that address, I think we had one today where the parents thought that since they were 11th grader, rising 11th grader, they didn't need to do another transfer request because we had said that we were stable for our high schoolers. The enrollment letter, I guess I got, didn't say if you've moved your address, this enrollment would no longer be, you would not be.
Right, when you get your assignment strip, whenever we send those out after the board adopts whatever the enrollment plan is for the year, it doesn't have this language on it at that time because it says this is your assignment for next year based on what we know about you as of today. But if we could add this language to say, please know that this is contingent on you staying in your home, and if you were to move and you need to notify us, and we could see what transfer options are available and so forth.
Could I just bring it around? Is the policy committee requesting that there be some change or add that would say that the staff will notify parents on an annual basis of the requirements of this subsection? Or are you okay because staff has provided assurances that there's multiple different documents and they will do it? It's sort of not clear where you all landed on it even.
Yeah, I think do we want it in policy or in rules and procedures? I think it's appropriate for latter.
I agree.
Yeah, I think if they're addressing the concern it is formalized, then the method of formalization is fine, just so long as there's staff direction to provide that notice.
So for it to be
So I have a
noted in the
question.
rules and procedures.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So or do we want to add the notice or leave the text as is? So are we wanting 30 days from notice Or are we, I mean, right now, this could be 30 days from when you moved and we found out about it and we got you. I think we're leaning against got you.
You're right,
So
I think so.
So do we want to add the, a student who has been notified? Yeah.
So now you're talking, we're parsing, but now you're talking about different types of notification. You're talking about
Yes.
letting families know with your assignment, if you move, that you need to let us know. And here's the rules, and we need to know, and here's how that will go. Then there's a second notice that you're talking about. And on the first one, you said that can be R&P, staff's got that. On the second one, the question is, when does the 30-day sort of clock start? Right, and that so if you're wanting to tie that to notification, then essentially you are saying staff needs to notify the families that we've determined that you're no longer domiciled in this district and that, you know, you've got 30 days from now. And if that's what you're doing, I just want to be careful about the word notification, because it may be a situation where we can't find the family. And so I don't think it's that it would be the intent for it to be when you actually finally get actual notice. You found somebody around, you know, you've chased them around the world, and then you finally said here, and then your 30-day clock starts. So I think it would, if you're going to do it from some notice, it would be when there is an effort, when there's an effort to notify, whether that's sending it to the address that we have on record, right, or the like, you know, but you know, because there's different types of notices, right? There's notifications where you publish things in papers. That can be a notification in certain circumstances. And then there's like actual notice, where I've handed this to you, and it's actual notice. So
Okay.
I think it should be some kind of intended notice. Like, I mean.
What does that mean?
You know,
Okay.
after staff has, 30 days after staff has
Chime
made
in,
an effort,
Karen.
has made an effort
If
to,
you refuse to receive the summons,
yeah.
your refusal doesn't mean that it wasn't issued.
Does 30 days after staff has made an effort to notify would be one way,
Okay,
but
Ms.
go ahead.
Carter, go
Right.
ahead.
So my recommendation would be to say in the sentence that begins with, if the student no longer has a right to be enrolled in the school system because of the change in domicile or other circumstances, comma, and an effort has been made to notify the student of this lost eligibility or of your lost eligibility to attend, a grace period of 30 days will be provided so that the student, et cetera.
That's why she's sitting where she's sitting. Ms. Carter, did you
Well, yeah,
want to
and I
add to
guess
that?
for me, I see this as two separate things. Like, I feel like, I guess I heard it in my mind, this was more about establishing the expectation for the families to actually notify the data manager of the school. So I was hearing, I guess, almost two different things. Like, there's this, if you get notified, or are we giving parents, is the expectation that the parents notified the school within 30 days of a change? Does that make sense? Because I'm reading this two different ways, because I thought this was about establishing the expectation for families to take care of notifying the school, not us going out and finding them. And so for me, this is that, and so now if, I guess it seems like we're doing.
I think it's the intention of both. It's sort of,
Yes.
we expect parents to be forthright and let us know when they've moved. And we get, that's probably the last thing you're thinking of. You're trying to move your boxes, and all of a sudden you get a return piece of mail from the school and go, oh, forgot to do that, right? So we get that that's normally what the situation is. But I think the second half of the paragraph, and maybe it just needs to be two pieces, is what happens if you don't tell us, or what happens if we find out and we've notified you, what's the next step for your family when we discover that you're no longer eligible for admission in Wake County schools?
Do we have redundancy from the statement on the bottom of page 10, I think it is, right? Because there we say, if a student no longer has the right to be enrolled in the system because of the change in domicile or other circumstances, a grace period of 30 days will be provided such that blah, 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 blah. That strikes me as that's our notice, or could be our notice. Could we then we don't need as much of the other stuff, but basically, unless a grace period has been granted, at the end of that 30 days, these are the actions. That way we don't need to say again notification, because presumably then put the notification earlier, right? We don't need to say if a student is no longer has the right. We don't need to say that twice. Because what we're talking about is at the end of that grace period, which is also the notification period, unless other provisions have been made, then we can take this action.
I would ask whether or not staff would have the right to withdraw if we stop the paragraph there, because it does say they'll be provided to the student may enrolled while a request for discretionary admission is processed. If the board denies that discretionary admission, then where do we go?
To Ms. Carter's point, I think we need to do we need to add language with clarity about families must notify the school principal or data manager in writing of any change? Do we need us within a certain time period? The same 30-day, a 30-day, an equivalent time period, just so that there's clarity. Yeah.
Probably
30
be good
days.
not to use 30 days again, since it's gotten, it might make it more challenging to read with the 30 as many times. So what would be a fair time period for families to let the school know after they've left domicile, they've moved? You think 30 days?
I
Okay.
think 45 would be amenable to staff, because that gives them 6 weeks to figure things out without stretching it out too long.
Okay, so they leave, and that you'll
thought about this.
notify them of that requirement in your notices and so on and so forth, and you'll also let them know that if, once domicile is lost, that they can be withdrawn after 30 days, and that will be in the notices, and that's the R&P. Okay. But do you all want the 45 days in policy then, that they're expected to notify? I think that it's up to you all.
I think if it's policy language, that makes it easier for Ms. Pulliam to just copy and paste it into, and then if anybody wants to argue it, it goes back to policy. So I like it in policy.
We've already added 15 to Ms. Cash's. Yeah, 15 days. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Cash.
Okay, so that's one.
So to clarify, the first sentence will have something in it that reads along the lines of, please let us know within 45 days of your move. Secondly, once we've discovered that you've moved and you haven't told us, we may have to exercise a 30-day, after attempting to reach you, we may have to exercise a 30-day withdrawal procedure.
30 days from after the time that you
The-
make
the
an
attempt.
effort to attempt.
Or the effort.
So would it not add clarity if we put the if a student no longer, let that be the beginning of a new paragraph? Because up until there, we're asking the families to notify us. From there on, it's what happens after that. So I think it's a different action, isn't it? So
I
if we-
think it would address some of the clarification issues, most definitely.
If you make it a new paragraph there. So then the new paragraph would start, if a student no longer has a right to be enrolled in the schools because of the change in domicile, a grace period of 30 days will be provided. And this is where we're going to put after an attempted notice, right? So,
Well, except we had talked about putting that later, but I guess what I'm suggesting is put it there,
yeah.
and then you don't need the last repeat of that. Basically, it's at the expiration of that 30 days of notice that the withdrawal is possible.
Unless a student has been granted a student who has lost eligibility will be withdrawn upon the conclusion of the 30-day grace period following the attempted notice. I would rather have redundancy there, just so that there's no risk of following the efforts to notify. So,
But the language you had there, right, the following the attempted notice, I think that makes more sense than,
yep, following the attempted notice, 30 days following the attempted notice. You got that? Okay. This is, as always, robust. The board is awesome.
I have a question about the policy. Can I ask that here? It's not about any
Absolutely.
word changes or anything. That at the very beginning, because I'm always been a little confused about this, the 120 days at the very beginning for kindergarten entry. So a child that's in a private school and they decide to move from the private school into, I think we just had something like this, into a public school. That doesn't have anything to do with this, right?
It really depends on the circumstance. So if it's a matter of the 120 days is I've not been going to school anywhere.
Anywhere.
And my family decides to wait till day 121 to enroll me in kindergarten. At that point, the district has the right to say, so sorry, you need to start next school year. It's too late in the year to register your kindergartner. If a student has actively been attending a kindergarten somewhere else and has now moved into our district or made a decision to change schools, then they would work with the principal for their base school to determine if the student is eligible to start, or if they also would need to wait, again, depending on the records and the accreditation and so forth.
And so how do you distinguish between a homeschooled kindergartner? Is it a task?
There are
You told me
separate policies
something.
that address that for the
Okay.
principals to be able to review the records and review the transcripts and the accreditations, to determine whether or not the student is suitable for enrollment in kindergarten at day 121 with all these other classmates that have been moving through a curriculum at a particular pace.
Okay,
Or
so
whether or
that's
not they've been not doing that same type of accredited work and really would be disserviced by joining the class this late and should wait to start kindergarten. But again, that's not my area.
But that is the
But I can get
principal.
that question for the board answered in more clearly.
Okay.
It's generally a site-based decision, but they're given a lot of guidance
Okay.
on how to process
I
those
think that
types of
came up
requests.
recently, but,
Sometimes we'll get one where maybe they've completed a kindergarten. There was a particular situation we've had recently where someone didn't actually complete kindergarten at their previous location. It was a different state, and it wasn't even a public kindergarten. And so there was no completion of kindergarten records to present to the principal, but they were asking for first grade admission for next year. And that's a very strange and odd, not strange, but just unique. It's a very
Okay.
unique circumstance that requires individual investigation and the assessment for the student to determine if they're ready for first grade here in Wake County.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you, Ms. Pulliam.
Tiny wordsmithing, where we said put the paragraph needs I think A. It just says if student.
Oh, I called it. Just to close out the policy, with your permission, letter J then becomes letter K to just follow the new lettering sequence. And then I'm sure Ms. Crane Dr. Crane has made some adjustments in the legal references to account for any of the new policies and legislation that were being referenced throughout the revised
Thank you
policy.
for adding those.
Any
Any other questions or concerns, suggestions? Dr. Martin?
No, I'm good.
Sorry. Okay.
Do we want to summarize before we have a motion, or are we ready just for a motion?
We can summarize. So the main driver was first the preamble in A to add some just clarity around students who enroll for the point of entry of kindergarten. And then the main driver of the revision is the language regarding the military compact and agreements for students who are in families of active military members, and then the added language around change in domicile, just to be real clear and for us to be very transparent about our rules, asking our parents to be and families to be transparent.
We had a couple
then we did-
grammatical changes
Yes.
and the experiencing homelessness.
Yes.
Say we have
person-
some
And if we-
technical language for-
Students experiencing homelessness, if we can make those changes. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Did I?
With that, I make a motion that these revisions go to the board for first reading.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Hegarty. Any other questions, just further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So thank you, Ms. Pulliam, for 4,100. Now we move it to 40.
I'm still here.
150, yes. And you should have that, as she mentioned, as a printed copy at your place.
Yes. So for policy 4150, there are similar updates related to our military families, and then there's another similar update related to change of address. And the remainder of the policy largely remains intact. We have talked about using some information coming out of our thought exchange to come to you at a future date if you would like to
Good.
consider any revisions to the policy in its entirety, but we don't feel like we're ready to make any recommendations at this time. We just don't have enough feedback from the community and from you all to do that at this time. So these are mostly technical adjustments. So policy 4150, you will see a similar language approach was brought forward for any he or she gender-based pronouns have been removed and replaced. I think there might have been one or two policy reference edits, but our first substantive change is section C, assignment of students to particular schools. And this is where you'll see the address notification adjustments.
I guess I'll ask that you make the same language clarity with the 45 days for families, and just so that we're mirror the same time periods. Thank you.
And notice that the language will change here, starting with the second sentence, that if the notice is provided, the family will be given the opportunity of reassignment to the school for the new domicile or to remain in the current school through the end of the grade. It does clarify that if you choose to remain at the previously assigned school, transportation will not be provided by the district.
Important to clarify.
So this does have 30 days in it, where it is saying that if the family gives the notice, it says prompt notice, the family should give prompt notice of a change, right?
Yes.
And then it says, and if that notice is given in 30 days, then there's some added benefits to the family. It's almost an incentive plan. So do you want to make that 45? I'm not pushing, I'm just, but
Okay.
that would be similar to what you
Yeah,
did before.
well, it needs to be the same.
Yeah, so, okay, so that would be the same.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, do you want to have that staff would then have the authority to take action 30 days after there's notification to the family, similar to what you did before, an effort to notify them?
An effort.
Okay. Does that make sense?
So that probably needs to change the last part of that paragraph, because this reads that you could do it tomorrow. And I think we're moving away from that.
Correct. And please know the intent is to work with our families and to
Yes.
support them in these changes, because a lot of times the driving of these changes may not be by their own choice. And
Correct.
we certainly want to help them. But to your point, making sure the language reflects that in the policy is important.
I think that's also been our practice, especially
Yes.
when moves have not been initiated by families.
As we continue on to item 3, children of out-of-district employees, just some language clarification about which policy they should reference in the first sentence, and then a repositioning of the language regarding temporary membership cap. In the previous edition of the policy, it was at the end of that sentence, which could unclearly make it seem as if membership caps were of no consequence in any employee's assignment, and that is not the case. It's only if it's the school that the staff member is working at, or the campus that the staff member is working at. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear, that regardless of temporary membership cap would only apply to a school where you were employed. And then any available school for the appropriate grade span, subject to any temporary membership cap as well. Just kind of rephrasing that. It was a little open-ended there. In section 3, section A, item 3, where it reads children of out of, I'm so sorry, we are in section C. Oh, my gracious. We're in section C, page 5, item 3, children of out-of-district employees. So when an out-of-district employee requests assignment to a particular school, we work very hard to get them assigned to the same school where a staff member is employed. If the staff member is not employed at the school that they're requesting, then we might have to make alternate arrangements, particularly if the school is capped or has an applicant pool or
So that
things like
I'm clear I'm reading this right. So if an employee works at the school, regardless of a cap, the student could be assigned there?
Correct. That's our current practice, because they're at the school with their
they
students.
work
But they
at
have to
the
remain
school.
employed. If they're no longer employed at the school, then
But
they would lose
say
that privilege.
They're at a school and they want to be on the same approximate school or on the same campus at a different grade level. If
It's
that
my
school
understanding
is
that your
capped-
practice has been that the school or campus, so if we do have, I can use the Leesville example,
Yeah.
Leesville,
I
that's
just wanna be
considered one
clear.
single campus. So any staff member that works at any 3 of those schools would be allowed to ask for or their students to attend any one of the 3. But if it's a proximate school, then we would have a slightly different conversation. Say, I'm so sorry, although that school is close to where you're located, it
It's
is capped, and therefore we need to look for something
Right.
else.
You either need to work there. But Ms. Cash, are you concerned that we,
Know that they could go to, even in
But that's only if they work at that specific
Correct.
school. Yeah, yeah.
But I do know, like, if you work in Leesville Elementary, your high schooler can go to Leesville High School.
Do we want to, are you recommending we change that?
There's a lot of this I want to change.
Okay,
But we don't
okay.
have to do it today, because I think we're talking about the calendar of the policy.
Yes.
We want this policy that, well, I guess first of all, temporary capping is all of our caps, even though it's probably been there for a very long time. It's still, all caps are considered temporary. But, so we're going to talk, I think, further about kids. I think we need to talk, and I don't know where to do this. This is not
Okay.
temporary, the capping situation. Is your mic on? I'm sorry, I thought I did, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I missed
let's
that.
start again.
I apologize, yeah, I thought I had it on.
So I guess.
So just to recap, yeah, I didn't realize that the temporary, that an employee's child could go to any school on that campus. Like if they worked in Leesville Elementary, their child can go to that high school as well. But as far as the capping, I do think we're going to have to look at capping in general, not for many of the reasons I've stated, but we've come upon a few things recently that's going to happen in my district, is that there are students that are going into the other schools, like private or charter, but still have their same residence that they lived in prior to the cap. So they can go back and forth between our school and the private school and stay and still take up a space in that school that's capped, which we've found. We've just ran into this situation. So I think we're going to need to discuss this, because I think as we're looking at taking caps off our schools, and we see that kids have left to go to a charter school, which may take 50, 60 kids out of a school, it gives us the opportunity to take the capping off and take our transportation down to not transporting their kids. But we have allowed those students to be able to come back at any time because they lived in that house, the same house. They never moved out of that house. That's going to cause causing a ruckus in our capping.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
I didn't find out till recently that that's, so I think we're going to have to look at capping as if, even though you kept your same house, but you left that school, and then we, in our effort of our best use of our resources, we're going to take the cap off that school now because the numbers have gone down. This is going to happen in Abbots Creek. Numbers have gone down, but those positions are still there. And if a child decides to come back from the charter, they can go into Abbots Creek. And if all of them do, eventually that school's capped again.
And we should be allowing, okay, I understand.
that
And if someone
impacts the
leaves
families
the
that are being
school,
capped
they
out.
should not, okay.
Yeah, because I think the fair thing
You want a
is,
fair prioritization of
I
students
do.
being in the school. I would support
I
that.
do. I would like to see the kids that are capped out and
We
we're
need to be fair.
transporting have access to get back into the school, but be able
Okay.
to stay there for
All right.
stability.
All right, Ms. Pulliam, could that be
I just
addressed
wanted-
in this policy or a different policy?
There's a different policy that
Okay.
addresses temporary membership capping, but the clarification is, to what Ms. Cash is talking about, is that they still do have to present for enrollment prior to April 1st to be able to use the fact that they've been living in the residence for the period prior to the cap to be able to
Okay.
take that seat. So they can't simply come at any point in the school year. But to her point, it does put them in ahead of anybody at that same grade level who might be on the wait list, who's been waiting dutifully and going to our overflow school.
Okay.
So there is a bit of a conflict there in terms of who gets the favor. But that is the way the policy
Is that,
is
can we
written.
address that in this policy, or is that a different policy or procedure that your staff?
We hadn't
can-
conceived of bringing that to you at this time, but yes, we certainly could have a separate conversation about temporary membership cap. It's a different policy.
Because
so
I
we'll bring that
agree
to
with
you
Ms. Cash. I
separately.
think capping is straining our transportation system in a way that's unacceptable, and we should try to minimize that strain. So if we can both bring more fairness to school enrollment in a capped school and reduce transportation strain, that's two big wins for the school system. I think we should do that as soon as is possible.
And in fairness to all these families out there, because I'm trying to be as fair as possible to not necessarily reassign families
Right.
out of a capped school if we don't have to. But so as conditions change in that school to the benefit of the school, to not be capped or have reassignment, then we need to make that stable for all the kids that are there and not allow, I mean, it's not that I don't want these other children to come back, but I just need to, they should probably be capped out instead of the kids would just pull back in to the school. Otherwise, that just leaves that house gets to go any way they want to go at that point from the time they leave. Not the house, but the family that lives in the
Right.
house.
We need to be fair.
Yeah, I'm really doing it out of fairness to try to keep stability in that school.
And to
the
those
schools.
who are dutifully enrolled in Wake County Public School System, but we also want them all to choose our schools. They're great schools.
So I'm hearing that there's some significant questions about the capping priorities and that staff's going to review that and maybe bring that back. That's a separate policy.
I hear that that's not
But that's not part of this
Part of
policy.
It is part
4150.
of this policy at Section B. It's just
Yeah.
nothing that we had
Brought
forward for today.
It can be for further discussion.
So that could come back. In terms of this item here, though, are you all at peace with the notion that if it is a employee, that it would be an exception to the capping if the child is at the same site that the employee works at, but that you don't get that same priority if it's at a different site for a different grade span? And that's practice, right? So this is really just the language to align with your current practice.
Correct.
Is that, I think that's
Yes.
just what the topic right there. Is that where you all are okay with that?
I'm fine with
Okay.
that.
Just a minor comment on this one. As I read the heading, I think it maybe needs to be turned around to children of employees living out of district, because we don't have any out-of-district employees. All of our employees are in our district. So our employees may live out of district. So again, just a little grammatical thing I think would add clarification.
Employees who live out of district.
Children of employees who
Okay.
live out of district, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
A little more cumbersome, but
Thank you.
clarifying.
Okay, so now I got to get a clear, I'm sorry. So if they live in the district, do their kids get to go to the CAP school?
Yes, and other policies
Yes.
about it, if they
That's a
put it,
different
if they
policy.
submit, no, it's later on with the
Okay,
transfer
I'm sorry.
requests. This is just about out of district in this section, but with, that language is already in place for families of, children of employees who work at their schools that live within the district. They just may have to put in a transfer request if it's not the base attendance school for their area. And since we did talk about membership capping, just as a quick note, it looks like the policy doesn't have that guidance in it. It looks like the rest of it is an RNP, so we'll just look at RNP and bring those recommendations back to you.
Okay, maybe look at it and bring it for information
Yes.
to us. Thank you. That would be the cleanest way to do it as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, this is something we talk about a lot, and maybe as the next assignment plan gets developed and brought to us, I mean, I think we need to continually address capping. Ms. Cash has brought that up many, many times. Lots of us have. It's a facilities issue. It's a transportation issue. It's an everything issue. So, you know, the more we can get toward ending capping, the better it's going to be for all of us, and that's going to have to be assignment.
Any other questions, concerns on 4150? And I know Ms. Carter and Ms. Cash have those issues a great deal in your districts. Yeah. Thank you.
Where's that? Later on, just to bring attention to Section D, Item 1, subsection C, Item 3, where it's referring to the types of transfers that we are able to grant as staff. It does say that students can remain at their current school due to a Board of Education approved change in assignment, and the approved stability provisions is
Yes.
the recommended to coincide with current language.
Coincide with current language. Thank you. So that's
There are a few technical corrections in the section on transfers of students experiencing homelessness. Again, some of the personal pronoun or gender-based pronouns have been updated throughout.
Thank you.
And then in section F, on the final page, we wanted to just, for staff, to clarify practice. It's not always obvious to parents that not all transfer denials are eligible for appeal. There's only a certain subset that are eligible for appeal, so just make sure that language is clear in policy.
Thank you. All right, any other questions about any of those revisions?
Motion to move the policy as revised to the full board.
All right.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion, questions? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
And Ms. Kirshner, when this comes back for first reading, both this one and just the policy that previously we discussed, we'll highlight in yellow the additional changes we've made
Thank
from
you.
feedback results so we can focus your attention to those additional
Thank you, Dr.
revisions.
Garner. I know. You said we will. It's on the record.
It's a hard habit to break.
That's right. It's in the minutes. Too late, too late, too late.
Maybe we can get a hold of one of his bow ties, and his essence can be here with us.
Aw, thank you, Ms. Pulliam, for all of that work. Very grateful. All right. So next, moving on to revisions to 6220, operation of school nutrition services. A revision, Paula DeLuca and Mark Strickland are here. Maybe just Paula DeLuca. We don't need Mr. Strickland. How are you?
Anytime we can get Mr. Strickland to join us, we're going
There
to do
he
that.
is. All right. That's right. He's hard working. I just didn't see you. I'm sorry, Mr. Strickland. You better chime in when. All right. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I am here to present. Sorry. I'm here to present this afternoon a revision to an existing policy, Board Policy 6220, the operation of child nutrition services. The policy includes two revisions. The first being change to number 8 in the first section A, which is necessary to align with a state legislative change on indirect cost that was enacted this year. Before this new legislation took effect, indirect costs could be assessed to child nutrition services so long as the program had at least 1 month operating balance on a 3-year rolling average. The legislative change made an adjustment to require a 2-month operating balance with the assessment based on an annual determination. And so the recommended change that we've included, which comes from the NC School Boards Association, is inclusive of enough flexibility that would allow the school system to assess or forego an assessment of indirect cost to child nutrition services. The second revision is also in Section A. It's in number 14, which addresses the responsibility of the staff with job duties that include procurement activities for child nutrition program to adhere to certain policies of the board on conflict of interest, ethical conduct, and grant administration. And so those job duties that include those procurement activities involving child nutrition program funds is really the effect of the change. It replaces those with job duties that include procurement activities for the child nutrition program. And so in light of these recommended changes, we're presenting them to you today for your consideration and for feedback.
Thank you, Ms. DeLuca. And can you give us a summary of what that change in 8 now means? That you just have to carry a bigger fund balance? Is that what that means?
The fund balance is effectively, it's a conversion from a 1-month minimum requirement to having a minimum of 2 months now. And so it used to be that the 1 month requirement was also based on a rolling 3-year average, which was pulled out of the legislation. Now it's based on an annual determination and a 2-month minimum. And so the school system has the authority to assess an indirect cost, which child nutrition services would pay based on, its year-end results, or it can forgo collecting an indirect cost, say in a year when, we're experiencing some type of hardship.
Okay.
Did I answer your question well enough?
Yes, thank you. It's going to make your job easier or harder, I guess, was what my question is.
Does this make my job easier or harder?
Right.
To some extent, actually, it gives a little bit of a grace to child nutrition. But it certainly is not necessarily helpful to the school system because it's a shell game of funds. It's either I'm going to have the funds or the school system will.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, we're all operating within the same umbrella, so the net effect for me,
I gotcha.
I think we're all working together to try to allow for the school system to be able to assess so that it doesn't create a hardship, obviously,
Okay.
for the school system that might not anticipate the change in a budget.
Thank you.
For that
And
item.
It's reflecting changes in state policy, so.
Statute, yeah, 100% state statute.
So we don't quite have much. Just wanted to understand it. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Carter.
Okay, and it's not a change that you brought up, but I just wanted to mention, I guess, a concern I have. I don't know if it's concern or necessary. I know several of us have talked about this. It's referring to Section B, mill charges. And I just read that, and again, I know we're pressed for time and everything, but it's the second from the last, the one about what will be done if children aren't repeatedly, not paying for their meals, and how, possible legal action, getting CPS involved. And I read that to me, and it's just a different approach, I guess. I have a little concerns about how I read that, with especially everything going on. I know there are times where that might seem appropriate, but I also know we have talked about, looking to expand different avenues to have accounts where folks from the public can help cover costs, and working hard to get that. So I'm not saying, today looking to make that, but I just want to throw that out there to see if there's anywhere it could be put anywhere versus basically, that you can charge up to so many. Otherwise, you give them the alternative meal, or we're going to CPS or looking at possible legal actions, possibly. So I feel like there's room for, and again, don't know if it needs to be in policy or not, but then I feel like if it was, then maybe we'd have a little more motivation to get that going and actively recruiting and expanding that. So that was all I really wanted to say. Nothing about what was changes. I don't.
Thank you for raising that.
Well, I'll just note to that effect, I think we did make a lot of progress working with child nutrition to expand the number of meals that before an issue comes. It's a very clear directive that a student will not be confronted in public. I think that's important. And I think it's even important here that child nutrition staff doesn't go directly to child social services or anything like that. They go first to the principal. And the principal then determines the course of action, which most likely would go to a counselor or social worker first before anything else happens. So I think we're all in agreement. I think we all agree that there ought to be universal breakfast and lunch for all children. Until we get to that point, unfortunately, we can't let Child Nutrition Services bear all the burden. So I think we're all in agreement, but
Ms. Cash?
I think there are ways to get to universal, and it doesn't have to be government. I still think we have enough partners in our community that agree with universal breakfast and lunch and just want to partner and figure out the best way to do it. If we wait for the government, it could be a long wait.
well, let's not forget that we are part of the government, I guess is what I'm saying. So
Me too?
Yes, ma'am. You are a politician and you are part of the government.
Well, and we just did it for 2
Terrible
years.
thing to say.
Well, we just did it for 2 years.
Yes, it's
So,
possible.
It's possible. Through public
I know,
priorities.
and I just
Through
want to
support of public priorities, yeah.
continue that, because I
Yes.
think that is the way to get to a quicker universal lunch, or however we want to do that.
Oh, we absolutely can. It's a will. It's not a, is it possible?
It's an avenue.
Go ahead, Mr. Hegarty.
I mean, I think we're getting off topic and
We
off
are.
agenda here. Because, I mean, we can debate, I mean, I don't think it's a debate about whether it's a good thing, but we can debate priorities, and would we rather have universal lunch, or would we rather use that funding to address other key needs that we have? Are there special education needs? Are there academic needs? I mean, we really could go off on a whole, another meeting on this topic, so I just wanted to
All right.
try to get us back on.
Thank you, Mr. Hegarty. I appreciate that.
But
Yes, Ms. Scott.
Having said that, I do think the conversation that we're having right now does raise the issue that hopefully we can bring back again, as we have in the past, an overview of child nutrition services. And are there, big picture things that Ms. DeLuca may have to share where we can look at something that is more operational, efficient in terms of cost savings, as within CNS? Are there opportunities to partner with Title I schools, et cetera, et cetera? So I do think it's a valuable, and I know you think it's a valuable discussion too, but I do think if we can just request, I know our chair is not here today, but that may be something that we look for an appropriate place to discuss that, because this does come up over and over again. And my apologies for not being at the board meeting where we discussed the meal change increase. I know that was a passionate discussion among all of my colleagues, but I think anytime we have the opportunity to discuss that, to see, I don't know if that's necessarily a policy thing, but.
No, I think it is, I don't think we can address it in this policy. I think it needs to be a much bigger financial and operational discussion. I agree. So I know Mr. Hegarty will take that to leadership. I thank you for indulging us, our start. Yes, Ms. Carter?
I guess I wanted to clarify. What I was speaking of, because this is meal charges, is
Yes.
the thing about where you have accounts that are set up at schools that will cover funds for students that's what I would just.
Yes, and I think there's, some lack of uniformity, that some schools are able to do that through, and some, I think that's another operational issue we should at some point discuss. But as far as this policy, I think if a student routinely is at school and is not qualified for free or reduced meals, but is also not bringing food or being fed, I think parents need to be alerted, and we need to talk with parents. I mean, there's parents' rights and responsibilities that need to be laid out, and that's this policy. And I will stop right there before I start talking more about parent rights and responsibilities, or co-parenting, any of that. Any other feedback? But thank you, Ms. Carter. Your concerns are, I think, noted, and I think will lead to a larger discussion.
Do we need a motion?
Yes, we do.
Sorry. I move we approve the policy on first reading and move to the agenda for
Thank
the
you, Mr.
next regular
Hegarty.
meeting.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Operation of Child Nutrition Services revisions that were supposed to be very technical in nature. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Waters. I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, our final one. Thank you so much, Mr. Luca and Mr. Strickland. Good to see you. See how she handled it. She got it all. She got it all going. All right, 8305, Federal Grant Administration, a revision that Mr. Winters will bring to us. And I also am under the assumption this was revisions that are driven by changes in federal policy and statute. Mr. Winters. Hello.
Yes, and I just want to mention Lloyd's last policy is sitting next to his favorite department. That's exactly right. So, there you go. Exactly right. Yes, these were mostly technical corrections that are coming through on the Federal Grant Administration. If we look at Section A as we begin, it talks about terms and conditions of the awards, which we have always followed when we're dealing with grants. A1 is that cost of the federal grant is only when the cost is incurred during the approved budget period. That's standard practice. If you go to the number 3, talking about providing full and open competition when procuring goods with uniform guidance. That is something, uniform guidance is a little bit more strict than some of the other practices. I mean, local funds, we may purchase things a certain way. Uniform guidance has a little bit tighter laws. We try to bid most of our items now under uniform guidance because of the ability to use federal funds for things that we can use state and local funds also. So if we bid it under that uniform guidance, that protects us in the future if we need to use those federal funds. And some of this became important because we've got about $500 million worth of federal funds over the last few years. So it's just a greater spotlight on how we use our funds. Continuing down, school officials are encouraged to maximize the purchase and use of goods, products, and materials produced in the United States. This is our practice. Speaks to the contract shall contain provisions required in 2 CFR Part 200, which is part of the stricter guidance that are in the federal funds. And when applicable, verification that the contractor is not suspended or debarred. We do that as a practice with anything we purchase today. And then the final section pieces are under number 8, speaking to financial and performance reports. We're doing reports on a quarterly basis for NC Pro, for the state of North Carolina. For state auditors, we're doing the standard reports and final closeout reports, which is typical with any grant. We do those reports now. B2 speaks to a summary schedule of prior audit findings, which you see every year if we have an audit finding. Knock on wood, we haven't had one in quite a few years. And we also have an audit committee that we would also share the findings with. As part of the audit committee's responsibilities is that we would share a finding and then share the results on what we did as corrective action. So we not only would do that with the Board of Education, but also the audit committee. Under D7, policies protecting confidentiality of personally identified information and other sensitive information, also standard practice. And under E, it just gives some references to support the policy. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Winters. Any questions on the revisions to this policy, Federal Grant Administration 8305? Seems fairly straightforward.
Yeah, I see all technical corrections. It makes sense. I really appreciate that we're going to the higher standard because that way we have the greatest flexibility. I think that gives us the greatest opportunity for financial efficiency.
Excellent summary. Thank you.
Happy to make a motion to move this to the full board.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any questions? Mr. Winters just wanted to come and be with Dr. Garner.
That's right. I wanted to sit with him one more time.
One more
There you
time. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And I know. And I, again, have to apologize for being late, but maybe it worked out for I don't cry at the end. But I think I'd sent an email, but we had, will not have a policy committee meeting in July. We're going to have to recuperate from the year and from missing Dr. Garner. Dr. Crane and Dr. Martin and I will get together at some point so we can plan out the coming months. And we will be getting a lot more financial policies and some procurement and some other policies coming forward and financial policies. So Dr. Crane and I will stay in touch. And I know Dr. Garner will stay in touch. Sir, we cannot find the words to thank you for the work at Policy Committee, let alone for your tenure at the Wake County Public School System. I'm glad that you've been celebrated because it is very deserving.
Well, thank you very much. And Dr. Martin, as he opened the meeting, was gracious enough to give me an opportunity to make a few remarks then, and I did, and I won't repeat it, but to reinforce my deep gratitude to all of you for what you do each and every day to support our school district and for your work specifically with this policy committee. I know navigating these policies can be quite tedious sometimes as we're looking at word choice and language structure and all that, but after our work, I always feel like we come out at the other end with a better product, and a product that will support our schools, just like we've seen today. And it's often a springboard for more topics to be discussed, and that's what it should be. It should be that cycle of doing that. I want to thank Julie Crane for all her work in partnership with me over the years with policy. It has been a pleasure working with her, and to thank all the school and central services employees for their work in and out of policy when a policy specifically applies to them. They have been dedicated, hard workers in making sure that we come to you with the most relevant, up-to-date revisions for you to consider, and I'm grateful for them. But thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Dr. Garner. Thank you. We'll end with your kind words, and with that, this meeting is adjourned. Have a great afternoon.